1200 years before the birth of the dragon reborn, a mighty warrior rose to become legend. Arthur Paindrag, commonly referred to as Arthur Hawkwing, led the initially small kingdom of Shandal into a series of conquests later known as the Consolidation. The calendar used at that time marked the year 963 of the 3 years, when the kingdom of Aldershar, the last realm standing, fell to Hawkwing, who became the ruler of an immense empire comprising the entirety of the Westlands, except for the city-state of Tar Valon. Blaming Jol Ramedar, the king of Aldershar, for the poisoning of his wife and children, Hawkwing had him executed and sent all of the kingdom's nobility into exile, scattering the noble houses across the Westlands. Moreover, he effectively dissolved Aldershar altogether, merging it with the neighboring kingdom of Cairhien into the newly created imperial province of Andor. However, not long after, the High King regretted his brutal treatment of Aldershar, so he decided to recall Endara Castellane, daughter of King Jol Ramedar, from exile, bestowing upon her the government of Andor, which had Cairhien as the capital city. Almost 30 years later, Endara's daughter Ishara became the lover of Suran Maravale, the High King's first general, who was in charge of besieging Tar Valon. However, Arthur Hawkwing died that same year, victim of a sudden illness, plunging the whole continent into a century of conflict later known as the War of the 100 Years, as the High King had no living heirs, precipitating the rise of many warlords who fought for the throne. In the midst of that chaos, Ishara convinced her lover to lift the siege of Tar Valon, and, taking his army with them, they came together to Cairhien, where General Maravale married Ishara and swore fealty to her. Thus, Ishara claimed the land, ascending as the first queen of Andor, while the other claimants vied for supremacy over the whole empire. Ishara sought no more than their own lands. That added to the strength of Maravale's experienced army and an alliance with Tar Valon, since the Aes Sedai were grateful for the lifting of the siege, resulted in Andor successfully resisting as a sovereign nation throughout that bloody century. Nevertheless, it wasn't an easy time for the new kingdom, as the territory initially held by Ishara was little more than the land surrounding Cairhien. Maravale's prowess allowed Andor to expand to the rivers Erin to the east and Cairhien to the west within 5 years, but on the year 1017, Subran was killed by assassins, and when Ishara died 3 years later, all of their sons were also dead, leaving only their daughter, Alicent, to take the throne. She ruled for 15 years, and by the time of her death, all of her sons had been likewise killed in battle, making her daughter, Melusine, the rightful heir. She became the third queen of Andor, thus creating the custom that only a woman may sit the Lion Throne. From this time on, Andor became a queendom, always respecting Ishara's original treaty with Tar Valon of sending the daughter heir to the White Tower to receive education in politics and the use of the One Power, and the eldest son being trained by the Warders to fulfill the role of First Prince of the Sword. Melusine died in 1046 and was succeeded by Termile, although there are no records whether she was the daughter of the previous queen or another relative. In fact, from this point onwards, the line of succession is not clear at all, apart from the fact that all subsequent queens are descended from Ishara. Termile ruled for 8 years and was succeeded by Maragain. In the free year of 1063, 4 rival kings, envious of the growing power of Andor, united their armies and invaded the kingdom, marching on Cairhien. Queen Maragain led the Andoran army into battle, meeting them some distance west of the river Cairhien. In a furious battle in which Queen Maragain led the charge, the Andorans broke the invading force, securing the survival of the Queendom. Maragain was succeeded in 1073 by Astara, who held the throne for 12 years and was in turn succeeded by Talasian. Around the year 1090, Esmara Gitaris, a noblewoman from the south, launched an invasion over Andor, having already secured control over much of what is now Ilion and the plains of Marido. However, her invasion was defeated by Talasian in the last threat to Andor during the War of the 100 Years. Talasian ruled for 18 years and was succeeded by Queen Morrigan, who led the Queendom for 11 years before being replaced by Queen Lindell in 1114. 3 years into her reign, the War of the 100 Years finally came to an end, and by 1135 the destruction left by it made the rulers uncertain whether date-keeping had been kept correctly. Thus, it was decided to establish the calendar still used at the beginning of the Wheel of Time. Queen Lindell died on the year 30 of the new era, and by that time the customs specifying eligibility for the Lion Throne and regarding the education in Tar Valon for the daughter heir and the eldest son were firmly set as royal law. After the beginning of the new era, records become scarce. The next queen we have knowledge of is Morderlain, noted in history for her role around the year 300 at the Battle of Cualin Then between Andor and Tyr. The Andoran army was beginning to rout, so Queen Morderlain rode into the midst of the enemy army while carrying the Lion Banner. Her troops rallied to her side and won the day. Afterwards, Morderlain became an example of the courage and honor an Andoran queen is expected to show as a ruler. Nearly 200 years after Morderlain's reign, the first Andoran succession war took place. No records survive about who were the claimants, but it is clear by this time many noble houses claiming descent from Ishara Castellane already existed. Which one of those came on top when the first succession war ended is impossible to know, but at some point House Norwillian held the crown, and by the 10th century the ruling dynasty on the Lion Throne was House Mantiar. Dolera Mantiar became queen in 944, holding the throne for 20 years. Near the end of her reign, Gareth Bryne became Captain General of Andor, and when Dolera's daughter, Morderlain, succeeded her mother, Bryne kept his rank. The year following Morderlain's coronation, Andor became intertwined with the neighboring kingdom of Cairhien, so let's pause for a while and go back in time to take a full grasp on the origins of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun. Much like Andor, Cairhien's birth came to be as a result of the War of the 100 Years. One of the first kingdoms conquered by Arthur Hawkwing was Tova, neighbor to the High King's native Shandal. When war broke at the conqueror's death, the Tova nobles assembled to try and bring their kingdom back from the ashes. However, since Tova never had a king and was rather ruled by a council of noblemen, negotiations swiftly turned into infighting and massive assassination plots, which led to the former Tovan ruling class being wiped out. The only nobleman standing after this massacre was Matrain Colmcille, who became the first king of the newly found Kingdom of Cairhien, called after the capital city. Colmcille led the nation through the early stages of the War of the 100 Years, but after him we have to jump many centuries ahead to find the next known monarch, since the historical records for Cairhien are even more scarce than those of Andor. At some point during the new era, House Damodred ascended to the Sun Throne, and by the 10th century the most prominent monarch was Cairhien Damodred, a queen remembered for the prosperity she brought to Cairhien, though paid for with a fearsome ruthlessness that made Cairhyen's name being used to scare children. She had at least one son, whose name is unknown, but since she ruled for more than 50 years, she was probably succeeded directly by her grandson, the infamous king Laman Damodred. Laman waged war against Andor over trade routes, which ended with the signing of a peace treaty between him and Queen Mordelin Mantiar, which, among other things, stated that Laman's nephew and heir, Taringail Damodred, would marry Mordelin's daughter, Tigraine. In the year 972, the couple would sire their only son, Galad Damodred, but shortly after, Tigraine abandoned Caemlyn and her family, never to be seen again. Heartbroken, her mother died that same year, triggering the Third War of Succession, since she had no living heirs. However, Morgase from House Trakand, who was the closest relative through the female line, quickly stepped up, obtaining support from the majority of Andoran houses. But to secure the throne firmly, she married Taringail, Tigraine's widower, thus becoming queen. In 979, the couple had a son, Gawain, and in 981, Elaine was born, becoming the daughter heir. Meanwhile, in Cairhien, King Laman had foolishly decided to cut down a sacred tree given by the Aiel as a gift in order to make a throne for himself. Outraged, all of the Aiel clans crossed the spine of the world in 978 to exact revenge in what became known as the Aiel War. After killing Laman and his brothers, they went back to the Aiel Waste, but since Laman had no children, and Taringail's claim was nullified due to the treaty with Andor, the best claim to the Sun Throne fell on Taringail's sister, Moraine Damodred. But she had just become an Aes Sedai, and her only purpose in life was to find the Dragon Reborn, who had just given his first breath, so she rejected the crown. With no clear heir, Galdrian from House Riotin took the chance, seizing the throne. This is the state of things at the very start of the Wheel of Time, at the year 998. During the events of the series, King Galdrian sends assassins to kill Dina, the lover of Tom Merrilin. Not long after, Galdrian himself is murdered, and it is heavily implied it was Tom the one who killed him, ending the rule of House Riotin, and creating a power vacuum in Cairhien that triggers a civil war. A little later, on Book 6, Lord of Chaos, we find out Tigraine's whereabouts. Following the advice of Jitara Moroso, the Aes Sedai who had a foretelling, the missing princess, went out to the Aiel Waste, where she became a Maiden of the Spear, and eventually fell in love with Janduin, a clan chief. During the Aiel War, she came with her new people to the west, and during one of the battles of said war, fought by the wolves of Tar Valon, Tigraine, who was pregnant, gave birth to her son on the slopes of Dragonmount, dying in childbirth. Luckily, the boy was found by one of the soldiers, who took him to his homeland and raised him as his own. The boy is no other than Rand al'Thor, the series protagonist, who is thus revealed to be Galad's half-brother and a distant cousin to Elaine and Gawain. Rand, as the Dragon Reborn, takes Cairhien by force, ending the civil war. But, not coveting the throne for himself, he acknowledges Elaine Trakand as the rightful heir, as the daughter of Taringail, hence granddaughter to former king Laman Damodred. However, as we see during the latter part of the series, Elaine has other issues to face first. Her mother, Morgase, had been taken captive by Raven, one of the Forsaken, and under his influence she fell from grace in Andoran society due to her reckless behavior. Morgase was able to escape from Raven's grip, but the Forsaken ruled Andor in her stead until Rand himself fights him off, killing Raven. Nevertheless, the presence of the Dragon Reborn is never a welcome one in Caemlyn, and, eventually, believing Elaine abandoned her duties, some noble houses rise in rebellion, sparking up the Fourth Succession War. But Elaine manages to come back to Caemlyn in time to defend the city from the forces of Arimil Amarn, the rival claimant, successfully breaking the siege of the city and obtaining the support of enough noble houses to become Queen of Andor. With her homeland finally secure, there was room for her to also claim the Sun Throne of Cairhien in a personal union. We readers know Elaine is pregnant with Rand's twin babies, and since he is Tigraine Mantihar's son, their children have the best claim to the Andoran crown. But since the story ends around this time, whether the kingdoms of Andor and Cairhien will fuse under Elaine's rule or not remains a mystery for future ages. As always, if you like my content, please give me a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.